Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So this week I read On Beauty by Zadie Smith and I really loved it. So the only Zadie Smith I've read before is White Teeth, but I think I really prefer this one. It was very engaging, a really interesting book. It is this really tight, entertaining drama centering around this one family, and the whole book was just a lot of fun to read, even when it wasn't particularly happy. So our main characters are the Belsey family, who live in Wellington and are entrenched in the world of academia. So the father is Howard Belsey. He is an art history professor and researcher, and he kind of seems to hate everything, or that's sort of his role in academia, is to question everything. And he kind of proves himself to be a pretty weak man and is maybe not the character you like the most in this. He just keeps making these mistakes and you're reading the book and you're like, Howard, like, get it together. Then Howard's wife, Kiki Belsey, she is a black woman from Florida who's basically given her whole life to Howard. She's followed him to the universities he needs to be at and has raised his children, and that's sort of where we find her in the book, is feeling a little stuck there, having some marital problems with Howard and sort of wondering what happened to her life. You're definitely rooting for Kiki in this book. She is a really interesting character, and a character who has a lot of depth that we see internally that most of the people around her don't really appreciate her for, because she is not an academic, which is a term that's talked about a lot in this book. So then Howard and Kiki have 3 children. Their oldest is Jerome, who we don't spend as much time with. It seems like by the end of the book, some things are answered, but he still feels like a bit of a question mark to me. He spends a lot of the book away from home at college, but his big contention with his father in particular, Bee is being as loud as she can possibly be. But his issue with his father is that Jerome identifies as Christian, and his father doesn't really believe in any of that, seems to think it's all just kind of sentimental drivel. And Jerome kind of falls in with some of his father's personal enemies, which creates a fair amount of drama, like right out of the gate in this book. And for being one of the characters that I don't feel like I know as well, it's interesting that the book starts with Jerome, and what's a really brilliant opening is these emails Jerome is sending his father from overseas about, being Christian and this internship he's doing, and then there's just an email that's like, I'm in love and I'm getting engaged. There's a lot of humor in this book too, which I like. It makes it a good read. So then their second child is Zora, who's super overachiever. She's definitely on her dad's side for most of the book. She sort of thinks like him and adopts the same values that her father has. Zora is an interesting character because if you met her in person, you would not like her. She's not a likable character, but the value of seeing Zora in this book is that we get to see some of the internal conflict and not just this really intense exterior that she puts off. And then their youngest child is Levi, and Levi is a really interesting character. He's definitely one of the ones that, like Kiki, you kind of fall for him over the story, but he struggles more so than its siblings, or at least more externally than his siblings, with being a young black man, but being very much suburban. So over the course of this novel, we see Levi interacting with these Haitian immigrants, working class, that are really struggling in Wellington, and he is really, really sympathetic for their struggle, and he wants to be a part of their world and help them and contribute in some way, but he struggles with still being a little removed because he grew up with a lot of opportunities. So he's a really interesting character to follow in this story. So then outside of the family, some of the main players are the Kippses. Monty Kipps is Howard's like mortal enemy academically, and it often gets very personal. And Monty Kipps, he, for a lot of the book, you get a sense that he's not such a nice guy, but you hear things sort of indirectly, and then it's like the more and more the character comes into the story and you get to know him, the worse and worse he gets. His wife, Carlene, she is a very important character in the story for Kiki, and Kiki figuring out her life through developing this friendship where she hadn't had a lot of friends of her own. And then the Kippses have two children, Michael and Victoria, who are both pretty terrible in their own special ways. And so the Belsies and the Kippses are clashing with each other a lot in this book. They come into contact over and over again, and it always ends with some kind of drama. There's also a interesting, kind of sad character, Carl, in this book, who is inner city disadvantaged youth out of Boston that kind of comes in contact with the Belsey kids and gets pulled into the Wellingtonian world. So Carl is this extremely talented rap lyricist, and he gets pulled in to Wellington to write poetry, and he starts interacting with all of these characters. And there's this really great little moment after Carl's given a job on campus, and he runs into Levi, and Levi is very concerned with sort of the authenticity of the street, I guess, but really internally you can see that Levi's learned a lot about the world at this point, and he has this observation in his head when he sees Carl that he had this great thing that Wellington took from him, ruined in some way. So Carl is an interesting side character in this story. So all of these characters have essential flaws and dissatisfactions in their life, and they each have their own arcs to, I don't know, not entirely resolve things, but there's certainly every single member of the Belsey family is ending up somewhere different from where they start. So like Zora, for instance, is very much in control all the time, and in Carl, she finds herself unsettled, and maybe some of her insecurities come out a little bit more because of that character coming into play. And she's forced to reckon with the faith she has in her father. Howard, of course, fails every single test along the way, but there is a glimmer of hope at the end for Howard. And Levi, who sort of dresses the part and listens to the music and kind of plays the role of poverty, gets an actual taste for it and makes real friendships and connections with these people, and I think grows because of it. And then Kiki, through her friendship with Carlene and just having to deal with Howard and all of Howard's mistakes, I think finds her independence and her life that is separate from her family. So this book is incredibly engaging because there's just so much good drama in it. I mean, there's surprise engagements and affairs and deaths and contested wills and art theft. So all of these little surprising and intriguing moments in the plot are all really satisfyingly shocking, but it's all very grounded in this Wellington world that you get sucked into in this book. And, you know, we see all of this drama play out and then the very real effects on this very real feeling family. So we see things just repeatedly falling apart, and every time we're like, oh, it's starting to come back together again, and then it falls apart again. So all of this family, every single member is having to reckon with what they actually believe and what they just claim to believe. But you're definitely rooting for this family's happiness. Even Howard, in his weakness, you root for him to figure it out because you want them to be happy together. And whether that can actually be the outcome, you know, you're invested. The stakes are there in this story. And then everything in this book is further complicated by the cultural intersections that are at play here. I mean, we have religious issues in conflict, and we have socioeconomic issues in conflict, and racial issues and gender issues, and all of these factors affecting this family. So the Belseys and their story is inseparable from the cultural context. They're a family that seems to find themselves hitting the crossroads in every single possible kind of culture war. And I think these moments of intersectionality and seeing how all of these different societal factors affect like real individual people is typical of Zadie Smith's writing as I've seen it. And I think all of those elements and the sort of complicated nature of it, and, you know, allowing this to be a good, long, meaty novel allows for a lot of depth about those issues through this family. So, for instance, there's a lot of observations about womanhood in this book, and in a moment where Kiki is watching her daughter Zora and thinking about how hard she tried to keep the way society treats women's bodies out of Zora's head and ultimately failing, she thinks this: "It was in the air, this hatred of women and their bodies. It seeped in with every draught in the house. People brought it home on their shoes. They breathed it in off their newspapers. There was no way to control it." Which I think the language in that line is really interesting and beautiful. And a lot of the language in this has that. And then it's just like a good, deep, interesting moment that feels, of course, very relevant as a woman reading it. But we're seeing it very much in the context of the Belseys and their real world experience. So my only complaint about this book, and it's a minor one, is that there are a couple smaller side characters in this that are from the American South, and they just, I just cringe every time they come onto the page because they're written in this kind of I dialect way, and they seem friendly enough but not very intelligent, which is usually the chosen stereotype for Southern characters outside of Southern stories. But I don't know, Zadie Smith is an English writer, so I guess that's how they see us. But it's a very minor complaint, and it's just a couple minor characters. Kiki's from Florida, and she's very interesting and complicated, so I guess the balance is there. But overall, this is a really good read. It has a lot of depth. The characters are very real, and you're instantly interested in where their lives are going, and it's just very engaging, very entertaining. I think the literary minded reader and casual readers alike will really like this book, so I would definitely recommend it. After reading this, I definitely want to pick up Swing Time, which is also on my shelf, but as of yet unread. This definitely re-sparked my interest in Zadie Smith in general. Alright, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.